U2 has angered and puzzled some rock stars over their multi-decade run. Today, let's take a look at some rock stars who don't count themselves fans of the band, and stay tuned for the very last story, which is easily my favorite U2 story. Punk rocker Henry ROllins has been no stranger to making his opinion known about what he likes and what he doesn't like. He has on numerous occasions made his distaste known for the Irish band U2. He would tell an interviewer, they have the worst rhythm section in big rock. That is the most plodding, corny rhythm section ever to fill a stadium. If you look at some of those records, they're mediocre Brian Eno records with a bad band in the way. They need a producer like Eno to kind of prop up the cabaret singer and his one-trick pony. I just think when you campaign to promote both your band and world peace, it turns into a little bit like grandstanding to me. Former Oasis frontman Liam Gallagher would be interviewed by Loudwire in 2022 and was asked about the state of rock, to which he responded, I mean, not all of them are useless, but the majority of them are. The ones that think they're rock stars are not. They just live a very boring effing life. And I think rock and roll deserves a little bit more than just making music. You know what I mean? You gotta get out there and get yourself. You just gotta live an exciting life. It's like U2. They pass themselves as a rock and roll band, but what the... Come on, man. I've never seen and Bono. I mean, I've never seen them do anything remotely rock and roll, he would say. It was the same year Roger Waters also slammed Bono. Why, you're asking? It happened over a St. Patrick's Day poem he sent to House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Apparently Pelosi is a longtime U2 fan and a friend of Bono, which discussed St. Patrick's Day and the war in the Ukraine. Waters has been pretty critical of the West's response to the Ukraine war, while Bono has been a big supporter of the Ukraine. Waters would take to Twitter to express his displeasure with Bono, saying, "Isn't it enough that the Egypt Bono goes and hobnobs with the oligarchs at Davos every year without getting the Egypt Nancy Pelosi to foist his shitty poem on us?" U2 and Echo and the Bunnymen feuded for what seemed like several decades. Both bands came up during the same time in the late 70s and early 80s, and while many bands from Europe tried to make inroads in America, including U2, Echo and the Bunnymen didn't. The group's frontman Ian McCulloch once branded their Irish rivals as, and I quote, music for plumbers and bricklayers, and in 2011 told The Independent, I've always thought he was a C word referring to Bono, a real proper one. Had he ever been in Liverpool, he would have been laughed out of the place. U2 have never been liked in Liverpool. We know a fake when we see one. However, in more recent years, the bands have patched up their differences. Of course, one of U2's most controversial moves was when they gave away their album Songs of Innocence for free. Sharon Osbourne blasted the band on social media, writing, "U2 are business moguls, not musicians anymore. No wonder you have to give your mediocre music away for free because no one wants to buy it." Bono would laugh off the criticism, but her husband Ozzy also came after the band, telling Consequence of Sound, "The whole industry has completely changed over the last 10 years. People make records straight on the computer. U2 did an album free, and it's like, why would anybody do that? I don't know." Asked whether he listened to the album, Osbourne added, No, I liked some of their earlier stuff, but to be perfectly honest, that Bono pisses me off. He's made his name out of working with and talking about starving people in Africa. I don't particularly like what he does, it's phony." Meanwhile, Foo Fighters' late drummer Taylor Hawkins agreed, telling an Australian publication, "What happened to U2, man? I don't think people are that hyped on them. I don't know any of that new album has anything great on it. I listened to it once, but it's so marred by the whole sort of, like I said, Orwellian 1984 extreme that it just kind of sounds like a fart any way you listen to it." Meanwhile, Patrick Carney of the Black Keys told the Seattle Times that U2, and I quote, devalued their music completely. It sends a huge mixed message to bands that are completely struggling to get by. I think that they're thinking it's super generous of them to do something like that. And of course, we have to go to my favorite story involving U2 and the band Negativland. Negativland were notorious for being staunch advocates of fair use doctrine, which basically allows you to take someone else's copyrighted work and transform it in some way, whether it's sampling music, parody, criticism, or providing education. Now keep in mind there's no law called fair use, but rather it's a defense used in court. And while Negativland released many albums in their career, it would be one release in particular that caught the attention of U2 and resulted in a very expensive legal battle. By 1987, Negativland had built up a following when they released their album Escape from Noise. 4 years later, they were given a tape of radio personality Casey Kasem, who is best known for hosting America's Top 40 radio program. The tape consisted of Kasem berating his engineer by yelling profanities at him and disparaging the Irish band U2. Now keep in mind, this was before the days of the internet, so tapes like this were pretty rare. The members of Negativland thought they should do something with the Casey Kasem tape and mix in U2's music. And Negativland, up until this point in their career, had never sold more than 15,000 copies of any of their prior releases. Given how big U2 was, they surely would attract more attention this time around. Negativland member Don Joyce recalled, The bulk of appropriated material on our early releases was fairly obscure stuff, and U2 marked the first time we had ever taken on pop music. It wasn't even something that attracted us, but it just became appropriate because we got these Casey Kasem tapes mentioning U2. It's nothing we would have chosen to do otherwise, you'd remember. Negativland would end up putting out a single 3 months ahead of Achtung Baby in August of 1991 on its label SST Records. The cover, as you can see here, had the word U2 in large letters with the U2 spy plane and the band's name in small letters. The U2 single would feature parodies of the Irish band's well-known 1987 song I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, including kazoos and extensive sampling of the original track. It would also be mixed with disc jockey Casey Kasem's rant I talked about earlier. U2, for their part, had 2 massive releases towards the end of the 80s, with 1987's The Joshua Tree and 1988's Rattle and Hum. Fans were eagerly anticipating what the band had in store to kick off the 90s. Here's Mark Hostler of Negativland explaining what happened after the band released their infamous U2 single.
So it's ended up turning into a single. Side 1 was a cover version of the U2 song, I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For. We had a sort of dramatic reading of the lyrics by a member of the group, David, also known as the Weatherman, who kind of butchered Bono's lyrics and altered them. Now, when you do a cover version of a song, you don't have to get permission, but if you alter the lyrics, you got to get permission. So we did that. We used a 30-second chunk of the U2 song as the beginning intro. Of course, didn't clear that. There's bad words in this, and that was they didn't like that either. But the final thing that really brought it to the attention of Island Records, that really made them decide to nail our asses, was that we ended up making the record look like this, and we thought this would be funny. It's confusing. It looks like a new album from U2 that's called Negativland. And we liked the idea that you put this in a record store and people are confused. We liked the idea of creating this at the moment of consumption. You're not quite sure what's going on here. And Negativland's always been interested in creating that kind of moment of what is this? Or they can't do that, but they are. How is this possible? And we've been able to do that a few different times in our career, and it's very thrilling to get to do. We also assumed people would figure it out, but never underestimate the inattentiveness of the average American. Because it turned out that places like Tower Records was putting up entire window displays of this record when it came out, thinking it was the new U2 album.
By 1991, there already were court cases dealing with how sampling of music was to be handled from a financial and compensation point of view. There was one court case in particular which had set a precedent for how future litigation would be handled. Musicians who sampled another artist's song would have to pay licensing, publishing, and mechanical fees, which could amount to hundreds of thousands of dollars. A few weeks after Negativland's U2 release came out, they were hit with a 200-page lawsuit by both U2 and their label Island Records. The lawsuit alleged the band and their label were guilty of copyright infringement, trademark infringement, and fraud, as well as defamation of character because of the profanity in their single. The lawsuit claimed that placing the word U2 on the cover violated trademark law, as did the song itself. Island Records also claimed that the single was an attempt to deliberately confuse U2 fans, then awaiting the impending release of Achtung Baby. It was rumored by Hostler that the whole lawsuit would stem from one copy of the U2 single being sold in Athens, Georgia, that was bought by REM's then manager. He would inform U2's management about the record, thus resulting in a lawsuit. As part of their lawsuit, Island Records also demanded that every copy of the U2 single and any and all promotional materials be turned over to them and destroyed, in addition to the copyright being assigned to them as well. In just 1 month, Negativland and their label stood to lose an estimated $70,000 US, which was more than Negativland had made in 11 years being a band. The group did have a fair use defense on their side to justify their actions, but the lawsuit would have likely dragged on for years and bled the band and their label dry. Hostler would tell Wired magazine, "It felt to me like my child had been kidnapped." The band would be pressured by their label to settle out of court, which is what they did. And Wired magazine summed it up perfectly, saying Negativland couldn't afford to prove themselves innocent. The lawsuit also resulted in the band being dropped from their label. Fast forward to June of 1992, and the magazine Mondo 2000 was going to do an interview with the guitarist from U2, The Edge, over the phone to promote the band's Zoo TV tour. Unbeknownst to The Edge, the members of Negativland were friends with the editor of the magazine, who happened to invite 2 members of the band to sit in on the phone call. The members of Negativland revealed their identity to The Edge halfway through the interview. It would be ironic that U2's Zoo TV tour at the time featured sounds and live sampling from mass media outlets, and Negativland knew about this. They would spend a lot of their interview with The Edge asking about his ideas about the use of sampling on their new tour, and the legality of using copyrighted material without permission. The Edge claimed that U2 didn't agree with the aggressive legal approach their label had enacted, and that the band had advocated for Negativland to their label, but it would fall on deaf ears. So that does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like button and subscribe. We'll see you again on Rock and Roll True Stories. Take care.